In our last episode, we worked our way through Tier 8 of the complete video game console Iceberg, so let's drop down to Tier 9, where I can almost guarantee there's at least 1 or 2 systems on this tier that you've never even heard of, and I hope you'll learn a little something from the video. It's starting to get insanely difficult to find old commercials and print media, and sometimes even pictures, but I'm determined to bring you at least a brief history of every single video game console ever made. So let's just get right into it and take a deep dive into Tier 9, starting with one of the very first home video game consoles ever made, the Bandai TV Jack. The Bandai TV Jack 5000 is a first-generation video game console released in 1978. It was sold exclusively in Japan at a cost of 19,800 yen, which is almost $700 today, converted and adjusted for inflation. The TV Jack 5000 was the 5th system in the TV Jack line of Pong consoles. It was preceded by the TV Jack 1000, then the TV Jack 1500, then the 2500, and then the 3000, all of which were more traditional Pong consoles, not using cartridges but having games built into the system. Like the Takatoku videocassette rock we talked about in Tier 8, the TV Jack 5000 was built using the Gemini 6800 concept, which was purchased from General Instruments. This system allows manufacturers to purchase all of the components needed to build a game console, including the logic board complete with chips and even the game cartridge boards, and then design their shell around it, creating a console of their own, and many consoles of the era were made using the same technology. There were 4 variations of the TV Jack 5000 produced over the course of its 2-year lifespan, including a beige console, a blue console, and 2 yellow versions, one with an eject button and one without. Each version of the console came with different games built into the system. 6 cartridge games are believed to have been released for the system, including Road Race, Wipeout, and sports games. But games from other consoles such as the Hanamex SD50 and others also work with the TV Jack 5000 due to them all having the same General Instruments components. There are 2 controllers hardwired into the system, and each has a joystick and 1 button. When not in use, the controllers snap into the top of the console for storage. After only 2 years of production, Bandai abandoned the TV Jack 5000 to concentrate its efforts on its next system. It's estimated that fewer than 30,000 consoles were ever produced, making it very rare and very expensive to collect today. So let's just get right into the next console produced by Bandai, the Supervision 8000. The Bandai Supervision 8000, sometimes referred to as the TV Jack 8000, is a 2nd generation home video game console and the successor to the TV Jack 5000. It was released in 1979 at a cost of 60,000 yen, which is an incredible $1,800 today, converted and adjusted for inflation. This system was the last of the Bandai TV Jack console lineup, but was completely different from the other consoles of the series. The Supervision 8000 had a central CPU, while the other consoles that belonged to the 1st generation didn't. They didn't feature a microprocessor and instead used logic board circuits to produce Pong-style games. The Supervision 8000 had an 8-bit NEC CPU running at 3.58 MHz and had a 256 by 192 screen resolution and up to 16 colors. The controllers were very similar to the Intellivision, featuring a 12-button keypad, a round directional pad for movement, and 1 side button. There were 7 games released for the system, some of which were Missile Vader, Othello, Submarine, and Beam Galaxian. Although the Supervision 8000 was a decent console, it was very expensive and had few games. Bandai just wasn't getting the sales numbers they needed to keep developing games, and the console was discontinued after only 2 years on the market. In 1980, American company Mattel actually made a deal with Bandai to be the distributor for its Intellivision system in Japan. The 2 consoles are very similar, having a similar design and the same coprocessor, but with different central processors. Due to this licensing agreement between the 2 companies, it's a common misconception that the Supervision 8000 is a clone of the Intellivision, but in fact, the Supervision was actually released first, and Bandai only licensed to sell the Intellivision after its own system had been discontinued. During its short 3-year lifespan, less than 50,000 Supervision 8000 consoles were made, making it incredibly rare today. Keeping things in chronological order, we now move on to the Philips Videopac G7400. The Philips Videopac G7400 is a 3rd generation video game console released in limited quantities in 1983 only in Europe. It is a successor to the Videopac G7000, which was known as the Magnavox Odyssey 2 in America, and in fact it was planned to be released in the US as the Odyssey 3 but never happened. The system had a 5.91 MHz Intel processor with 6 KB of RAM, 1 kilobyte of ROM, and a 320 by 238 screen resolution, and had excellent graphics compared to other consoles of the era. As I said, there were plans to release the G7400 in the United States as the Odyssey 3 and later as the Odyssey 3 Command Center. The system was actually demonstrated at the 1983 CES show, and some prototypes have been found. However, the Odyssey 3 was never released, mostly because the company thought that it wasn't technologically advanced enough to compete in the marketplace, but then the video game crash of 1983 happened, destroying any chance of it ever being released. There were 15 games produced for the system, some of which included Trans-American Rally, Helicopter Rescue, Air Battle, and Freedom Fighter. Not only did the G7400 have its own library of games, but it could also play all games from the previous G7000 console. There were 3 expansion modules produced for the system: the C7010 chess module that increased the G7400's computing power so that it could play chess, the Voice, which was a speech synthesis unit, also compatible with the G7000, and the G7420 home computer module, which was a Microsoft Basic module converting the G7400 into a real computer, adding an additional Z80 CPU with 16 kilobytes of RAM and 16 kilobytes of ROM. Exact production numbers of the G7400 are unknown, but very few were made. After only 1 year of production leading up to the video game crash of 1983, the system was discontinued, making it very rare and very hard to find today. Another console released at the time in 1983, but in Japan, was the Nichibutsu My Vision. The My Vision is a home video game console developed by Nichibutsu and released in Japan in 1983 at a price of 40,000 yen, which is over $900 today, converted and adjusted for inflation. The system was dedicated solely to playing video versions of popular board games. A total of 6 games were released for the system, each being sold for 4,500 yen. Some of these titles were Reversi, Mahjong, and Mastermind. There was no controller for the system. Instead, the player used the keypad located on the top of the system. The only way to play a game in 2-player mode was to have a second My Vision console and use a link cable that would connect through a communication port on the back of the system. The console struggled to maintain sales when it was released, mostly due to the fact that it cost 40,000 yen when the Epoch cassette vision could be bought for only 14,000 yen, plus the fact that its games were very basic puzzle and board games. Then, to make matters even worse for the My Vision, later the same year it was released, Nintendo released the Famicom system and Sega released the SG-1000, both of which were less than half the price. This removed any chance of the inferior My Vision console having success in the video game market, and it was quickly discontinued. Total sales numbers are unknown, but there were very few consoles sold, making it very rare and hard to find today. Another console released at the same time in 1983 exclusively in Japan was the Compact Vision TV Boy. The Compact Vision TV Boy is the second-generation video game console developed by Gakken and released in Japan in 1983 for a price of 8,800 yen, which is about $200 today, converted and adjusted for inflation. The console was made to compete with the Epoch cassette vision, which had 70% of the video game market in Japan at the time. The TV Boy was an 8-bit system and had a 4 MHz Motorola processor that was built into its cartridges. The system had 2 kilobytes of RAM and a 128 by 192 screen resolution in 4 colors. There were only 6 games made for the system, each being sold for 3,800 yen. Some of these titles included Robotan Wars, Mr. Bomb, Frogger, and Excite Invader. All the games for the console were single-player only. This was due to the strange form factor of the console. On the left side was a handle that the user would grip onto, and it had 1 button. Then on the right side was a T-handle joystick used for movement. The console was released just a few months after the Nintendo Famicom and the Sega SG-1000, which, although were more expensive at 15,000 yen, were much more advanced and had more features, as well as a bigger game library. Also, Epoch had just launched the Cassette Vision Junior for only 5,000 yen, which was close to the cost of a single game for the TV Boy. These factors made the system obsolete from the start, and with a high price tag compared to its competition, very few and simple games, and a strange form factor, all led to the system having very poor sales. As a result of this, it is now a very rare collector's item and sought out by many retro game collectors today. Around this same time, a very unique game console was being made in America, and it's called the Vectrex. The Vectrex is a vector display-based home video game console developed by Smith Engineering. It was first released in North America in November of 1982 and then Europe and Japan in 1983. It sold for $199 or about $600 today adjusted for inflation. The Vectrex is unique in that it's the only vector display console ever released for the home market. Vector-based games don't use sprites or pre-designed images like traditional game consoles. Vector-based games used the system's processor to generate lines on the screen. There were many arcade games at the time using this technology, such as Asteroid, Star Trek, Battlezone, and Red Baron. Vector game technology did have both advantages and disadvantages. Being that it didn't use sprites or pictures for its games on screen, there were limitations in the color palette used and there was no shading. But on the other hand, vector graphics didn't lose quality when scaled up or down, so the lines on screen are always crispy and futuristic looking. One thing's for sure, you can immediately spot a vector arcade game when you see it. The Vectrex, unlike other video game systems at the time, didn't need to be hooked up to a television set. It had an integrated monochrome CRT monitor, and a detachable wired controller can be folded into the lower base of the console. Games came with translucent color overlays to place on the screen, and you could purchase accessories like a pair of 3D goggles known as the 3D Imager, and a light pen for drawing directly on the screen itself. Initially it did pretty well when it was released, and the board game company Milton Bradley actually bought the company soon after. But unfortunately, due to the video game crash of 1983, sales of the Vectrex plummeted. Milton Bradley cut the cost of the Vectrex in half to try to recover, but it just wasn't enough. And after losing over $30 million on the system, they decided to cut their losses, and it was discontinued the following year in 1984. A few years later, an educational game console was being produced, and it was called the LJN Video Art. The Video Art is an educational video game console that was developed and manufactured by LJN. It was launched in 1987 at a cost of $99, which is about $250 today adjusted for inflation. Its functionality is similar to basic personal computer paint programs. There are two main inputs on the system's controller, a joystick controlling a cursor to draw lines and curves, and a slider to select up to 16 colors. Turning on the console without a cartridge inserted into the system gives you a blank screen for drawing. There were only 9 games made for the system, and some of them include popular franchises like Looney Tunes, Marvel Superheroes, Disney Coloring Book, and A Trip to the Zoo. In 1987, LJN spent most of its $5 million TV and print advertising budget on a run of TV commercials, including a rap-style beat saying,
"Then my mom, she got smart. She got me video art."
In 1987, to try to boost sales, Toys R Us claimed that the Video Art was among its hot toys for Christmas, alongside the NES and talking dolls such as Cabbage Patch Kids. But the console was mostly hated by critics, and USA Today put it on its list of toys that deserve to be dumped, calling the Video Art an expensive etch-a-sketch for your TV that's much harder to use and not much fun. And the results don't look nearly as good as those shown on the TV ads. The Video Art was one of the less successful interactive video game consoles compared to the Viewmaster Interactive Vision and Video Smarts. It was discontinued in late 1989 at a heavy price drop and is considered a commercial failure. It's LJN's first, last, and only video game console they ever made. Jumping forward to a more modern console and rounding out Tier 9 is a very unique system designed for South America, and it's called the Zeebo. Zeebo is a 7th generation video game console released only in Brazil and Mexico in 2009. It originally sold for 500 Brazilian reals, which is about $180 today converted and adjusted for inflation. After only a few months on the market, the price was dropped to 400 real and then only 300. The Zeebo was unique in that it was 3G enabled. The company made a deal with AT&T, and the console had a cell phone style SIM card so it could connect to the internet without the need for a modem or home internet. This was due to limited internet access in many urban areas in Brazil and Mexico. Amazingly, there was no monthly fee for internet access, and it was included in the purchase of the console as long as you owned it. The user only needed to purchase the actual games themselves. The Zeebo doesn't use DVDs or cartridges. Games and other content are downloaded wirelessly over broadband cellular networks. In addition to games, the Zeebo also provides internet connectivity, enabling users to access educational and information content, communicate via email, and do social networking all on the console itself. The system had 1 GB of internal storage for games and an SD slot for expansion. The Zeebo came with a standard Z-pad controller that had 7 buttons, a directional pad, and 2 analog sticks. Other accessories available were the Boomerang, which was a wireless controller with a built-in accelerometer using motion sensing technology very similar to the Wii. A wireless keyboard was also available for use with the web browsing app, email, and social media. There were over 50 games made for the Zeebo, many of which were remakes of mobile phone games like Resident Evil 4, Crash Bandicoot Nitro Kart 3D, FIFA 2009, and Rally Master Pro. There were also original games made for the Zeebo designed to use the motion sensing controller like Boomerang Sports, Football Club, and Zeebo Extreme. The Brazilian version of the console came with 3 free games pre-installed, while the Mexican version came with 5. Even though it was fairly successful, in May of 2011, Zeebo announced it would end production of the system to work on other projects. The Zeebo Net 3G network would remain active for another 6 months until September, when it would be shut down permanently. An estimated 30,000 consoles were sold during its short 3-year run, and luckily, the system uses the Brew platform, so using the Zeebo SDK, people are still porting games for the system to this day. And that's it for Tier 9 of the complete video game console Iceberg. If you made it this far, I really do appreciate it, and if you took a second to click the like button, that would be amazing. Let me know in the comments if you had any of these game consoles, or if you had an opportunity to play any of them. We're starting to get into some incredibly rare and obscure consoles now, and there will be even more in the last and final episode. I have lots more in store for the channel, and I try to upload new videos every week, so be sure to subscribe if you want to get notified of new Iceberg videos. I also have a poll on my channel on the community tab, so you can help me choose which Iceberg series I do next. So be sure to check that out and vote which Iceberg topic you want to see in the next series after I'm finished with this one. I'll do that with each series I make, so you the viewer will determine what videos get made next. You can follow me on all social media platforms at IcebergDocs if you want to stay updated and connect with me, and if you want to help support the channel, you can do that too by becoming a Patreon, links in description. Again, I thank each and every one of you for your support and for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.